Every hour that you spend practicing SQL on LeetCode, HackerRank, or DataLemur, any of those platforms, has you training to do something that will not work in a real interview. And I know that because I was a working data analyst, I use SQL almost every day. When an Amazon hiring manager put me through their actual technical screen, I could not answer his questions. Not because I didn't know SQL, but because I had never practiced SQL in the conditions that a real interview actually requires. So what I'm about to show you is that the gap between how you practice and how you get tested is going to cost you the exact offer you're working hard towards, unless you change one specific thing about how you study. So let me tell you what happened, because this is not hypothetical. This was years ago when I was building my community, leading a Discord server, and connecting people transitioning into data, putting out content consistently. And throughout that community, I met someone who was a hiring manager at Amazon. We built a relationship, and at some point he offered to run me through the exact SQL technical screen that Amazon actually uses. Not a simulation, but the real process. Of course I said yes immediately, but within the first few minutes, I understood what I had been avoiding. I was an analyst. I was using SQL regularly, but window functions, I had a very surface level idea, but nothing really more than that. CTEs, I knew the term, but I had never really produced one from scratch and explained my reasoning while doing it. And when subqueries came up, I was already rattled, already in my head, and already feeling the full weight of not being prepared. I failed. Not barely, I failed in a way that it was impossible to rationalize afterward. And here's what made it worse. I had been practicing. I had been putting in hours on all the SQL platforms you can think of. I had progress bars filled. I had problems completed. I had every certificate you can think of. By every measure those platforms gave me, I was ready, but I really wasn't ready. I was not even close to ready. And that is exactly where you may be right now if your only SQL practice is happening inside a platform with autocomplete, syntax highlighting, and the expected output staring at you before you even start. So here is what most SQL learning actually looks like. And I need you to be honest with yourself of whether this describes your routine. You sign up for a course or a practice platform, you work through the problems inside the built-in editor, the editor highlights your errors in real time, autocompletes fills your table and names and functions before you even finish typing them. Some platforms even show you the expected output before you even start, so you can reverse engineer your way to the answer. You finish the problem, you move on, and the progress bar inches forward. This feels like learning, and I understand why, but it is not really preparing you for the real experience of a real technical interview. It's preparing you to pass problems inside a specific environment, and those are two completely different skills. When I sat with that Amazon hiring manager, there was no editor open. There was no autocomplete, no color grading, no expected output. There was a problem, a blank space, and a notepad, and a person evaluating how my mind worked. I had never practiced that, not even once. Every hour I had spent on SQL had been inside a supported environment where the tools were quietly doing the portion of the cognitive work for me. The moment those tools were removed, I did not know what to write first. I see this constantly with my own students. I will ask someone who has been practicing SQL for months to walk me through a query out loud before even touching the keyboard. Just the logical steps. And a significant portion of them just cannot do that. They know how to solve the problems in an editor, but they never learn how to think through a problem before the editor gets involved. That is a tutorial loop. You are building SQL recognition, not SQL thinking. And recognition collapses the moment the environment stops supporting it. Think about it plainly. If I ask you right now to explain in plain English why you use a CTE instead of a subquery, not the syntax, but the actual reasoning, could you do it clearly and without hesitation? If there was any pause in your answer, you already know what I'm pointing at. And here is a part that also should worry you: the scaffolding, the autocomplete, the highlighting, the expected output. It does not exist in an interview. The moment someone removes it, everything you practice on those platforms collapses. And you will not know it's going to collapse until you're going to get there, staring at a blank screen and when a hiring manager is watching you struggle. That is the gap. And every week you keep practicing exclusively inside these platforms, that gap gets more deeply embedded. Not because you are not practicing hard enough, but because you are practicing the wrong thing. All right, so now I want to address something that is making the gap even more dangerous, because there's a narrative circulating in the data career space right now that is pointing a lot of people directly into a wall. The prevailing narrative that AI has changed the SQL equation, that with tools like ChatGPT and Claude generating queries on demand, deep SQL fluency is becoming less important. You can just use AI in your workflow workflows, lean on it during your studies, and the hiring teams are adapting to this reality. I have seen this take everywhere in the last 18 months, and I need to be direct with you about why it is not just wrong, it's actually setting you up for more failure. AI generating SQL has not reduced the value of deep SQL understanding. It has raised the floor, and when the floor rises, the people without depth get exposed faster, not slower. Think about what this actually means for your next interview. When AI can produce a basic join or a standard aggregation in seconds, those are no longer things that differentiate candidates. The companies hiring for serious analyst roles are not testing you for surface level SQL anymore. They are testing you on the kind of thinking that AI cannot do reliably on its own. And there is a practical reality most people are not talking about. In a live technical interview, you're not just sitting on your own machine with your preferred tools open. Many companies will specifically restrict what you can access during a technical screen. The expectation is that the work is yours. So if you cannot produce clean, explainable SQL without AI generating it for you, you will be exposed the moment you're asked to defend your logic in a follow-up conversation. Now, I'm not anti-AI. I use it in my own workflows and I teach my students how to use it properly and intelligently, but there is a version of this conversation that is giving people permission to skip the hard work of actually developing SQL depth, and that permission is going to cost a lot of analysts the opportunities they are working towards. So where does that leave you? You are practicing SQL inside a supportive environment that does a lot of the thinking for you. And since AI has raised the bar for what interviews are actually testing for, and every hour you spend doing the comfortable version of SQL practice is an hour you are not building the muscles that you need when the support gets stripped away. This is a situation. Now, let me show you what fixing it actually looks like. Okay, so after that Amazon failure, I did not take another course. I did not grind through more platforms. I did something that felt completely uncomfortable and counterintuitive at the time, but the discomfort of it is actually why it works. I opened a blank Word document, not a SQL editor, not a coding environment, a plain white Word document, and I started working through a SQL problem in that document, writing the queries out in plain text with no syntax support, no autocomplete, no error detection. Everything had to come from inside my own head. This is the whiteboard method, and the reason it works is because it closes the exact gap I just described. It forces you to practice SQL in conditions that are actually harder than any interview will ever face, so that when the real thing comes, it actually feels easier than the practice, not harder. And there are three components that we're going to talk about. All right, so the first component, the no-fly zone. Before your session starts, you commit to one rule: nothing external. No SQL editor, no Google, no AI tool, no Stack Overflow, no notes. For the duration of the session, every answer has to come from your own understanding. If you do not know something, you sit with that and try to work through it from logic and first principles. That feeling of not knowing where to begin, that blank screen with no help available, it is not a signal to stop and look something up. It is the exact feeling you will have in the first 60 seconds of a real technical screen. And if you have never experienced it before you walk into the interview, you already lost. You need to have been through it before, and you need to know what that pressure feels like and still be able to produce work inside of it. All right, quick pause. Now, if you want to land your first job in data analytics and avoid the lengthy mistakes that I did, click the link in the pinned comment where you can find the exact steps that my students use to land their job in data analytics without going back to school. All right, now let's get back to it. All right, component number 2, voicing your thinking out loud. As you write, you narrate every decision in full sentences, not just what you're typing, but why are you choosing this approach over the alternative, what problem you're solving at this step, and where the query is heading. This is the piece that changed my SQL more than anything else, and it is the piece that directly fixes the interview failure I described earlier. Window functions stopped feeling like intimidating syntax the moment I had to explain it out loud what I was actually computing across a group of rows. Once I could describe the logic in plain language, the syntax became a translation of an idea I already owned. Before that, I had just been memorizing code and memorizing definitions that I did not fully understand. CTEs became my default over nested subqueries, not because someone told me they were better, but because I can narrate the logic out loud. I kept arriving at points where I needed to name an intermediate result so I could reference it later. That is precisely what a CTE does. Understanding it through narration rather than just memorization changed how I structured every complex query from that point forward. Subqueries became intentional. Before the whiteboard method, I used them out of habit and familiarity. After practicing them out loud, I started asking myself mid-narration whether a subquery was generally right structural choice or whether it was just a default that felt comfortable at the time. That question alone improved the quality of my SQL writing at a structural level. Remember what I said about interviews, testing whether you can think, not just whether you can produce a result. Narration is how you prove it. Most candidates go silent when they hit a hard moment. They type, they pause, they delete, they retype. The interviewer is going to be watching a screen with no idea what is happening inside the person's head. And that silence creates doubt. And that doubt, even when the final query may be correct, is enough to push a hiring decision the other way. A candidate who narrates out loud whenever the interviewer interrupts or redirects, they do not unravel because they were not executing a memorized sequence. They were reasoning through a problem in real time, and that is a quality that separates offers from rejections. All right, last component, number 3, skeleton before syntax. Before you write any SQL, you write the logic of the query in plain English as comments inside the document. You map out exactly what needs to happen step by step in a language that has nothing to do with SQL. Something like, first, isolate records from the last quarter, then connect the customer table, then group by customer and calculate total revenue, then filter to customers above the threshold, then rank and limit. You write all of that out first, and then you translate each comment line into a SQL code underneath it. This separates the logic problem from the syntax problem, and those are two completely different cognitive tasks. Most people try to run them simultaneously, which is why they stall halfway through the complex query. When the logic is already solved in plain English, writing the SQL becomes a translation exercise. The hard thinking is already done. What remains is execution, and execution under those conditions is far more reliable. Think about setting up the GPS going from LA to New York City. Once you put in the address in your GPS, all you gotta do is follow it. The combination of all three, the no-fly zone, narrating your reasoning out loud, mapping the skeleton in plain English, replicates the internal experience of a technical interview at a level no practice platform can match. Because the goal is not the problems you solve, it is the conditions under which you can learn to solve them. This also changes how you show up to the role itself, because the whiteboard method just doesn't prepare you for an interview question. It trains you to approach any SQL problem like a senior analyst approaches it. You define the logic before you touch the keyboard, you think in layers, and you make structural decisions deliberately instead of defaulting to whatever feels familiar. That is the difference between someone who can write SQL and someone who can own a data pipeline, lead a technical conversation with a stakeholder, and be trusted with complex work. The roles that require this levels are not rare. They are the roles at the companies with real infrastructure, real investment in their data teams, and compensation that reflects that. They exist, they are hiring, and the question is whether the candidate in front of them can demonstrate the kind of thinking those roles actually require. So your next technical interview is coming, maybe in 2 months, maybe next week, whatever. It might even be tomorrow. Maybe you've even applied and waiting on the email. And when it arrives, the editor will be gone, the autocomplete will be gone, the AI will not be there, it will just be you, a blank screen, and someone watching you think. Everything that you do between now and that moment will either prepare you for it or not. So here's what I'm going to ask you to do today. Open a blank document right now, find one SQL problem that generally stretches you. Write out the logic in plain English or pseudocode, as they say, as comments before you even touch a single line of code. Then narrate out loud as you translate each comment into SQL. No editor, no hints, nothing external. It will feel uncomfortable, but that discomfort is the point, because the alternative is keep doing what's comfortable right now, keep filling out the progress bars, keep getting all the certificates that mean nothing, and keep building a false confidence that is going to shatter the moment someone takes the training wheels off. It's gonna happen. You decide which one of those people you want to be when your name gets called. And if you want the full roadmap, the skills, the projects, the positioning, everything that connects into an actual offer at a company that pays you what you're worth, click the link in the description to see where to start.